seeing a screen that says Death's Education, Apprentice Education and Planning. It's your funeral. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Then now just give me one sec. All of the things that could be going wrong are going wrong. And that's wild to me because I've done this so many times and they don't go wrong. So just give me one moment here. All right. So all of the things that could go wrong have gone wrong. We've gotten that out of the way. That doesn't happen often. When it does, I usually say that the name is Susan Smith. But tonight, I'm going to be honest with you, and I'll tell you that my name is Krista Ovanel. I will begin with just a very brief land acknowledgement. I'm so grateful to be here on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, the Musqueam peoples. I'm honored to be an uninvited guest here in this beautiful corner of the world. And with that, why are you here? Who am I? Why are you here listening to me as if I'm some sort of expert? I'm a funeral director. I'm an EOL educator, an end-of-life educator, and I am a death doula, an end-of-life doula. I'm the founder of Death's Apprentice Education and Planning. And I sometimes joke that, you know, you've probably heard this if you've met me in any other circumstances, but I am really Canadian when it comes to my introduction. I have to tell everybody all of the things that I'm not, because in my work, I intersect in so many different areas, finance and law and human heart stuff, counseling type stuff. And I'm none of those things. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a tax expert. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a counselor. I am not even an event planner, but I am an educator. And I have specific expertise in what it means to truly have your affairs in order. And that's what I'm here for. And that might be why you're here too, right? So what I want to do tonight, and I hope you're not here for the real estate presentation because you're not going to get that one tonight. What I want to do tonight is I want to help you understand your real and legitimate disposition options. I want you to help you learn about what you're going to need to ensure that you have everything in place from a disposition perspective at the end of your life. And I want you to think about what you might want. And then I'm going to help you figure out if it makes sense for you to pre-plan or to pre-purchase all of these things that are kind of floating around in your head. And there's some good reasons for both of those things, which we will go into. I'm going to have time, 100%. I will have time for questions at the end. But I would also like to say that there will, if something is coming up to you that you really want to address, you can simply just chime in. I actually have my cameras set up in such a way that I can't necessarily see everything that's coming up, but you can pop it in the chat. I will do my best to get to it there. And if I am really being obtuse, just be like, Krista, and like unmute and just tell me what you need to tell me, and I'll see what I can do about answering it. Okay? Good. All right. And like I had said earlier, you are so welcome to just stay muted and to stay like dark if you want to, if you're in your pajamas. I'm still in my pretty little outfit that I was wearing earlier that has my skulls on it. But if you're in your jammies and super comfy and you don't want to turn your camera on, that's totally okay. All right. So from our first thing, what is disposition? I really want to just make this so clear. No, you can't be a tree. And if we're friends on Facebook, or if we're Instagram friends, or if you're the kind of person who still forwards emails that have like funny little information in them and whatnot, do not forward me the one about being a tree, because you can't. There are actually only 2 legal disposition options in British Columbia right now. One of them is, and I have an absolute whole other evening webinar on disposition options that are both real and imagined at this time, but that is totally another night. Right now, all we have available to us is burial, either conventional burial or green burial or traditional, conventional, flame-based cremation in British Columbia. One really, really important thing to understand, no, two really important things to understand. The tree pod that you might have seen on Facebook, that I'm put a little picture of it in front of you right now, doesn't exist, conceptual only, lovely for getting us thinking about these things, but absolutely not something you can do here or anywhere in the world. You could buy a mushroom suit, but may I just say they are total hoaxes and you would be wasting your money. So really what we're going to be talking about is conventional burial, green burial, or conventional flame-based cremation. All right. So one of the things that I would like to get a little bit of a like a raised hands or whatever from you. Does anybody know where you should put your choice about disposition? And disposition is simply the choice of either cremation or burial. Does anyone know where you should put that once you've made that choice? No?
I know where you shouldn't put it, and that's in your will.
Would love you to. Was that Jane? No, who was that? That was wonderful.
That was Kate.
That was Kate. Ah, smart, smart.
You
smart.
can put it in like your personal directive living will.
And who's that? Who's saying that?
Carol.
Okay, so absolutely. I wouldn't want you to actually put it in a living will document, but and the reason for that is that so many people don't actually take the time to let people know that they have one of those, right? But it's certainly better than your actual will. And the reason that it's better than your actual will is that what happens with an actual will is it's not going to be read until after you're dead and probably buried or cremated. So the thing is that a lot of us think, oh, I've already taken care of this because I have made a notation in my will that I want to be either buried or cremated. It's really not an ideal place to put that information. So what I want you to do is put it into a living will is an okay kind of way to conceptualize it. Another thing to think about would be simply a letter of instruction. And that letter can be either a letter or it can be a wonderful conversation over the dinner table. This is water, but it could be a convivial conversation with wine and cheese and a big long evening. It could be a nice quiet cup of tea. It could be anything. It doesn't even have to be a letter, but it has to be something that other people know. And they have to know it quite quickly after you die. So don't put it in your will. All right. One of the things that people really tend not to know is that there are so many things to think about when we think about even a simple, and I'm putting that in quotes, even a simple disposition. So for many people, they might say, I just want the basics, right? But the thing is the basics mean something really, really different to anyone that you speak to. And I don't want people to get kind of sucked into this idea of that there is some universal basic or some universal simple. Because I, as a working funeral director, I have actually created, if you will, simple cremation packages for people that have cost well over $20,000. And to that person, that was a very simple cremation. I've also done the very same thing for a couple of $1,000. That person, that was simple, right? So it's really challenging to, when we don't know what we don't know, it's really challenging to just say things like, well, what I mean is I just want a simple cremation, or I just want a simple burial, because there are so many things that are included in that all have decision points. So in a basic disposition, you will always need these things, all right? You're always going to need someone to pick up your dead person. That's called a transfer. You're going to pay something called professional fees. That is actually the time spent talking with the funeral director, right, and making the arrangements with the funeral director. There will be something called documentation fees, where the funeral director spends their time putting information into their systems so that certain documents can be created for you. Your dead person will need to be sheltered, and there is basic body care that will always take place, and casketing, the putting the person into a casket, because even if you're going to be cremated here in BC, you need to be in what's considered a casket. It can be a very simple casket, it can be a cardboard box, but it will be a casket, as it were. All right. Um, the cost of the cremation itself, the actual cost of placing you inside that great big furnace called a retort, that is going to be something that you're going to need to pay for. If your idea of a simple disposition involves burial, then instead of the cost of cremation, you're going to have the cost of opening and closing the plot and the cost of the plot itself. And then you're going to have two tiny little fees that nobody ever thinks of, but one of them is a $40 fee that is charged on all adult human deaths in British Columbia, called the Consumer Protection British Columbia fee. And the other one is a death certificate. And almost all of us need a death certificate. You don't actually have to have one in the case of a death, an adult death in British Columbia, but almost all of us need at least one, and many of us need a few. So those are $27 each. So virtually all of these things that I've just told you about, these are, well, actually, every single one of these things are unavoidable. And every single one of these things are what are normally called guaranteed costs. There are a few exceptions. For example, the death certificate in British Columbia has not gone up. It's $27. It hasn't gone up for something like 17 years. It's probably going to go up soon, and it's probably going to be $30 soon or $32 soon. So that may not be a guaranteed cost in a pre-needed contract, but most of these other things that I've listed and that I've explained to you will be a guaranteed cost. This is what goes into the basics of what we think of as a basic cremation or a basic burial. All right. Then there's the batteries not included part. All right. And you might, even if you've made arrangements to donate your body to science, you actually, as part of the terms of that intake process, will also have to make alternate arrangements. Because even if you've made those kinds of arrangements and you don't even plan on dealing with disposition for you and your family, well, you're going to still have to have something in your back pocket. At a minimum, it's going to include, that alternative will include those basics that I just listed. But there are other things that you could have, right? There are other things like the ceremony, like the celebration, like little things like flowers or an obituary. And honestly, those can be costly. But should you pay for those in advance? The catering, those little egg salad sandwiches, for example, right? Should you pay for those in advance? My feeling on the matter is that those are not guaranteed items. Those are almost always third-party items. Those are almost always things that will go up, almost usually always go up in price, occasionally go down, but not very often. You can create a contract if that's something that you would like to do at any point with those things in it. For example, my mother has done that back in 1995, and more about that later. But should you? And I am not 100% sure about that. My general thought is that one thing that a lot of people don't consider is that when a death occurs, especially if it was a sudden or in any way unexpected death, what a lot of people don't consider or know or remember is that bank accounts are immediately frozen. And they could be, conceivably, they could be frozen for a very long time, especially if there was no will in place, or especially if there's a probate, any kind of complexities in the probate situation. And so what then, right? How do we pay for these basics and maybe these extras, maybe these fireworks? How do we pay for that? What generally ends up happening is it comes out of pocket. So when people ask me about extras, like things like the egg sandwiches and the party and the flowers and the obituaries, I'll often say, why don't we get back to basics and think actually again about the things that we are going to need to just keep the lights on, right? An emergency fund, if it were, as it were. There's a couple of things that you could do with this emergency fund. You could put it in a pre-need funeral contract, or you could just make sure that the people who are going to need to be executing your wishes will be able to access that emergency fund, not from your bank account that will be locked upon your death, but maybe it's an ICE account that they have. That's actually something I've done with my children. Both of my children have a couple of $1,000s because that's what I've decided will be a reasonable amount of money that I have saved up over a short period of time, some period of time, to make sure that no matter what, it's in their regular bank account. They have control over it at any time. If they want to raid it for freezies or for Tootsie Pops or whatever, they can totally do that. They know, however, that it is actually an ICE and in case of emergency fund. There are other ways that you can do that though. So before we go too deep down the rabbit hole of all of the extras and the fireworks and all of that kind of stuff, I would love to just have people give a little bit of consideration to the the actual realities of what happens when you die. All right. The next thing that I promised I would talk about is that I really want us to consider, is there anything that I wouldn't want, right? You've already thought about the egg salad sandwiches, you've thought about what kind of party you want to have, you've thought about the things that might be meaningful to you and to your family. But it's also really important to spend some time reflecting on what doesn't matter to you. Because if it doesn't matter to you, but it's kind of commonly done, it might end up being something that, because people don't know what they don't know, people just kind of think, oh, I guess I have to do this, you know? And the reality is you don't. You can have you can have your choices and your wishes honored in the way that is most meaningful for you. But in order for that to happen, you have to think about both what you want and what you don't want. And for me, working with someone who knows the business and who can provide guidance is a great way to make sure that you will be able to be walked through that process, right? In my case, I'm an actual funeral director. And so we are licensed professionals, and we are people who work day in and day out with people who are experiencing loss. And we know what you will be asked. We know how situations will unfold. We have done this many, many hundreds of times, thousands in some cases. Not me thousands, but in some cases, thousands. You can also, the thing is that if you work with a funeral director like me, you can have your pre-planning. It can be meaningful and validating because you're going to be in a no pressure and an educational kind of situation. And you can just ask questions and get them answered in a way that you can consider them. And you'll be considering them without grief compounding or clouding any of your conversations, or your judgment, your better judgment, right? And what's really interesting, and like if anybody's taking notes, take a note of this. In British Columbia, this is the only place that we can have unlicensed sales people selling us this incredibly important product. And I have seen some stuff. Now, I have worked with absolutely immaculate professionals who are unlicensed professionals. Oops. And I managed to have I managed to have a spelling error. Sorry about that. Thanks for yeah, I'm glad to have noticed that. But the reality is that I can that you can actually have people who really know what they're doing, or you can have people who are working in a bit of a mill and have incredible sales agendas that they have to get through. And they will just kind of tell you what they need to tell you to make the sale. One thing is that an unlicensed salesperson who is in a very high pressure position is likely going to just be focused on closing the deal, always be closing, right? And they have very little experience with funerals or with death work at all. So they won't be able to guide you through what you want and what you don't want. And believe me, if anybody gives me a carnation, a set of carnations at my event, I will be very, 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 very unhappy. I will get out of my casket and I will come and hunt down that person and I will just be like, no, absolutely not. You are not allowed to have the carnations. And that's the thing, is that a funeral director or someone who has experience in death care, they can actually help you through the questions. So this is not just a plug for me. This is a plug for people who actually understand this realm. All right. So I do know that there's going to be questions at the end, but I'm going to just kind of preempt or give us a little bit more detail on some of them. All right. Yeah, this all makes sense. But what if I move? Or what if the funeral home goes out of business? Or what if I die somewhere else? Or you know what if I just don't die? Right? My sister is actually clinging to this one. She is like, Krista, that is great. And I'm glad you've got such a wonderful little business happening, but I don't need it because I am not going to die. So if you or your sister are in that position, then good. You don't have to be here. But for the rest of us, it is quite likely that we are going to need to work through some of our resistance to this work, right? It's hard for us because we're not that good at letting go, and we absorb messages that we're almost giving up if we talk about this kind of stuff in advance, but that's not the case. Actually, when we do this work in advance, we are taking a huge burden off of the people who will be needing to make these decisions. So let me address the what if I move. If you are in Canada and you pre-purchase a funeral or a disposition package from any Canadian funeral home who is working with a company called True Stage, then that is essentially an insurance product. You are not making a relationship specifically with the funeral home. You're making a relation. You are, but you're also having that relationship underwritten by a huge company that can absorb any loss if you move or if the funeral home goes out of business. So if, for example, you were living, a dear friend of mine actually spent most of her life in PEI and came here, and she's now spending what she knows to be her remaining days here in Vancouver. And she's like, damn it, I bought this thing. I asked to see her paperwork. Blessedly, and this is more and more common now, she had an insurance product as opposed to a trust. If you are dealing with anyone who wants to sell you a trust, please hang up the phone, get off the Zoom call, walk away, say thank you, but no. Trusts are very, very, very difficult to undo. But an insurance product, like the ones that almost all reputable independent funeral homes now and corporate funeral homes now deal with, very, very, very straightforward. If you move, you can actually take that with you and assign it to a new funeral home in a different part of Canada. If you move to the States, it gets a little more complicated. If you move to Europe or like Azerbaijan, yet a little more complicated. But here's the great news. It can still, the entire value plus interest of whatever you have paid will actually be paid to your estate. So in the very quote worst case scenario, you can simply just have the value of whatever you have already paid for paid out to your estate. So you will be completely whole and no money that you have paid plus interest will ever be lost. If the funeral home goes out of business, same story. You have the relationship with the funeral home, hopefully, but if something terrible happens and they go out of business, it is actually not underwritten by the funeral home. The contract is underwritten by a huge insurance company. And so they can protect you from the individual home going out of business. Same situation. You can either move it somewhere or you can just simply have it paid out to your estate. You can also have it refunded, but there is usually a fee associated with that. And depending on how much interest you've accrued, you may or may not end up the same. So my advice is always just to remain whole, have it paid out to your estate. What if you die somewhere else though, right? That's a big one. So if you travel frequently, something that I would love to see you do is to make sure that you have travel repatriation insurance. It's a very small cost. But what happens is that from the time that you buy it until you die, whether that's 1 month or 1 day, 1 month, 1 year, or 50 years, 90 years, it doesn't matter. You only have to pay that fee once. Your body will be repatriated back to Canada, and all of the paperwork and everything that is associated with getting that done will happen under this one very small, like one call, 1-800 McKinnon Bowes, please go get my mom who has just died in Azerbaijan, right? They will actually even fly you out to come home and fly to come back with her body, for example, if that's something you wanted. And they will make sure that everything that needs to be done from a consular perspective and all of that kind of thing, everything is taken care of with literally one call. I used to work at a funeral home here in the West Coast. That was in the West. It was the second largest in Canada, but the largest in West Coast in the Western Canada in terms of repatriation. On the very same day, we received 2 calls from a family who had suffered a loss overseas. One of them had this insurance, one of them didn't. The one that had the insurance had their dead person home within 2 weeks and did not have to pay 1 extra penny. The people that didn't have this insurance, 2 weeks later, when that body came home, were absolutely no closer to even really knowing where their person was or the steps to take next, blah, blah, blah. 6 weeks later, that person was finally repatriated. Now, some people might say, let's just leave that person, in the other country. We won't go to that expense, what have you. For this particular family, it was very important to repatriate to Canada. And even if you don't want to deal with the expense of an overseas death or what have you, you actually can't leave a body just dead like that. Like you will be, the authorities will be asking you for instruction, and there will be fees and there will be things that need to be taken care of, even if you want to do, even the consular fees for registering the death overseas are something that are kind of a pain to handle. So if you if you travel at all, I strongly, strongly recommend this. You should probably just go ahead and get the standalone repatriation insurance if you travel at all. And if you die somewhere else, that'll totally take care of it. I've actually even served a family once they were snowbirds. And as long as they had a legal residence in Canada, which was 6 months plus 1 day here in Canada, they were able to be repatriated to Canada. And it was super, super wonderful for them. Joanne has asked in the direct message, she's asked, where do we get this? That is actually something that I sell. It's repatriation insurance through True Stage Assurance, True Stage Assurance insurance packages. And it's $595 and you buy it once and you never ever have to buy it again. It's totally standalone. Whether you buy anything else to do with your end of life, if you buy that, you know that if you're more than 100 kilometers away from home, or if you are, sorry, I hope that didn't show up on your screen because I just pressed something over here. I'm hoping you're not seeing ACES BA249, but if you are, sorry, it'll go away soon. Or if you're away from home, or if you're across a border. So for example, even in Blaine, that's less than 100 kilometers away, but the death that occurs in Blaine is going to be a big hairy pain too. All right. Yeah, And Jane said that some trips, like to the Antarctic, they insist on repatriation insurance. You know how else I know that's true is that I had another family that I served whose young man was a climber, and he had gone up the second highest, what is that, K9 or something like that, gone up the second highest mountain, and he died in a terrible tumbling accident. And he had to have repatriation insurance before they would actually let him get the base camp permit so that he could begin his trip. So yes, that is very true. There are some cases where you will absolutely need it, and there are virtually all cases where it's just a good idea.
But that Krista, that insurance was only for that one trip. It's a one-time event, so it doesn't carry over into other trips.
Until you're dead. Yeah, one time.
In my case, I thought it just applied to the actual trip.
It's not applied to the trip. It's insurance that you buy. Like you would probably, for many people, they might buy it at the time of a trip.
Yes.
So they would think, oh gosh, that's an extra $595. But
2000,
it's not
2000.
applied to that trip.
What?
It's not applied to that trip. It's applied to all of the trips that you will take, even, for example, up to Kelowna or down to Blaine, or yeah, it's a
So I should find the paperwork.
it's called Journey Home.
Mm.
Which I hate those poetic names, but nonetheless, that's what it's called. So yeah, Journey Home. I didn't mean that to be such a sales pitch, but there it is. It's just something, actually, that's kind of me eating my own dog food. I don't have a ton of insurance in my life. I have that insurance. I got it before COVID when I used to travel a lot more. I don't travel as much now, but I will again in the future. And this actually brings me a lot of peace that I have this. You can also buy that, like I said, you can buy that on its own. All right. So let me just go here. I genuinely believe, and anybody, and I know I have a few familiar faces in this, and some folks that I never met before. Yay, thank you for coming. But I genuinely believe that what matters in the end matters now. And that I and people like me, funeral directors, ethical providers of pre-planned needs and whatnot, we want you to have a clear picture of what lies ahead. And there really isn't sort of an easy way to do this, or a bunch of generic checklists that are just going to tick off quickly. And if you're with anyone who tells you that that's the case, so I can have this wrapped up for you in 20 minutes or something like that, they are not telling you the truth. This and all aspects of advanced planning, you need to spend some time thinking about what matters to you, what matters to you now, because those are the things that will matter in the end. And I get that it can be a little overwhelming, but I know from personal experience that it feels incredible to have this done. As a funeral director, when I sit with families whose loved ones have done pre-planning, pre-contracted planning, they're like, wow, in the last couple of years, because our people are of a certain age or whatnot, I've had 2 or 3 deaths, and this is the only one that has been pre-arranged or pre-planned. What a difference. This is the language that I hear all the time. People say, this was so easy. I knew what to expect. I didn't feel stressed or taken advantage of. And you can either have autonomy and control, even in the end, and you can know that you're leaving things in such a state that the people who love you and who will be looking after you, they will know your clear expressed wishes. And that means that on a day that could honestly be one of the worst days of their life, you'll be making things. You will be remembered as to be making things a little bit easier for them. Or you can just totally give that up and you can surrender to the chaos, right? Like that's okay. But I know that it becomes chaos, and I know that it becomes complicated, and it becomes a series of questions that no one has ever thought about before. And one question after the other just ends up being one more thing that people who are left behind have to manage. And I don't wish that on anyone. So I've purposely left quite a bit of time for specific questions because I knew this wasn't going to be a huge group, but I just want to make sure that we have time. Take my info, take hello@disapprentice.ca and or my number. I will absolutely send out a generic thank you to everyone here, and I'm going to provide a link, it's sort of like a download for you so that you can just have a little bit of information on file and whatnot. But what I would really like to ask you to do is either DM me in the chat. That means like go to that little note where it says, who are you going to send the message to? And you can pick me directly. That's called a DM, a direct message. Or just send me an email and say, actually, Krista, I would like to talk about this a little bit more because I don't want to, the one thing that's really important to me is I really always want everything that I do in these platforms to be informational rather than sales based. But at the same time, if it is something that you would like to learn more about, I want to know that. And I would like to make a time just for you so that you can have that time. I can pre-plan with you in a contractual way, and there would be no additional fees for my services because essentially what happens is I'm paid a commission, really. We don't call it that, but it's a commission. And I will spend several hours with you going through what matters to you and what you'd like to do and what makes sense in your particular case. And then we would write up a contract, and that you would pay the contract price and no price on top of that. For some people, they want to go through the planning process, but they're really still not settled. They don't feel comfortable about where they are in the world or where they feel that they're going to be when they die. But I actually work with a number of people who want to do the planning work with me, but they don't want to contract. I can absolutely do that too, but I do charge an hourly rate for that. And it usually is a couple of hours that you're going to need to book in order for that to be quite comprehensive. So for some people, it's just like, that's sort of all in one. Let's just go with the contract. For other people, they're like, no, I don't really want that, but I want everything to be written out. And I'm going to make my own arrangements to have the money available. Remember what I had said before about, I'll stop that. There, I'll stop that share so that I can see your lovely faces again, those of you who are still on screen, so that I can, so that, you kind of know what you're doing and what's going to be happening, but you just don't want to go through with a contract. So that's totally things that we can do. So it's me talking at you for 40 minutes. Now your turn. Questions or thoughts or things that are coming up for you, but that you'd like to know. Have warned you. Yes, Carol, but you just unmute, remember.
I just have a question because you had mentioned that as soon as a person dies, their bank accounts are frozen and stuff. What happens when it's a joint bank account?
Okay, so a joint bank account with a right of in Canada. So you are in Canada, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So a joint bank account with a right of survivorship is usually a much less complex affair. A joint bank account you would still have access to. However, you need to immediately notify of the death, and the joint account is no longer a joint account. And so there is a process that has to take place to make that a non-joint account. It's not as horrific as a complete closure of the account, but there are still steps, and it can actually also be things that you really don't want to deal with immediately following a death.
Yeah, no, I was just curious as I look ahead for my parents, especially. Okay.
So if you can get your, absolutely, my love, I see you, Joanna. I will get to you in just one second. But if it's your parents in particular, if you have enduring power of attorney for them, very easy for you to get on their bank accounts, and that would be a great idea.
I am on one of them, and then I have a joint account with my mom. So yeah.
You're taking good steps there. How about you, Joanna?
No, I was just gonna state that I think if you're a power of attorney and a joint, then I think you have more leeway to get into that account if
Yeah,
someone dies.
definitely get, but do not rely on one,
Yeah.
on just having the joint account. Make sure you have the enduring power of attorney.
Yeah.
Joanne, where are you located, love?
Vancouver.
You are, okay. Okay, I'll answer your direct question later. I've warned friends that I've connected with in the past. I'm a funeral director. I'm used to uncomfortable silences, so I'm just going to be quiet to wait for the questions to percolate up.
Krista,
Yes.
is there one particular insurance company that deals with this special insurance if you die somewhere else?
Absolutely. So True Stage is the company that deals with that. They used to be called Assurant, but they're now called True Stage. I deal with that. I am the broker for True Stage. So if that is something that you're interested in, it's something that I would like you to connect to me about.
Okay, thank you.
It's a really, you know what, I'm not a heavily insured person. That is insurance that I carry, and I have seen the value of it. As a funeral director, I see it more often than a normal human would, but oh my God, things that you have to deal with when that happens. Whew.
Mhm.
With the True Stage insurance, are you able to purchase it if you're not in that province from you?
Yes. Yes. If you are in my province, then people who want to think about funeral planning would be dealing with me or another person like
Mhm.
and a specific funeral home.
Correct.
You're not, if you're just looking for that standalone insurance, yes, that's a Canada-wide project, and I can help you no matter where you are. Yes, Joanne.
So what do you charge for funeral planning?
So I'm 150 an hour, 125 if it's over 5 hours, but my rate is 150 an hour for just funeral planning. I
And
also,
how long does that usually take?
I would, so I like to talk too much. So I generally cap it at 2. My strong recommendation for someone who doesn't want to make a contract, but wants to make sure that they have the planning in place, would be to take either my prep school program, which is in the school program, it's about $300, $295. And then you get everything, including the funeral planning, or do one-on-one programming with me, which again, you get all 4 elements of the holistic planning, including the funeral planning. That would be, that would ensure that you kind of had everything in place, and it would end up costing you the same as just doing the funeral planning.
So when you do the funeral planning, you don't have, it's different than having insurance for when you die, so the funeral's paid for, right?
Yes, if you do an insurance-based plan, like a contract, there are a couple of benefits are that you can pay for it over time, and you're not going to be able to do that at the time of death. At the time of death, you just have to come up with the money, or your people have to come up with the money. But again, for people who don't know exactly where they're going to be or what they might want, doing just planning but not contracting might make a lot of sense for people.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I think is really important, and I might have like kind of flown over it because I wanted to make sure that I had time for this at the end, but when people are thinking about funeral planning, there's so much more. Actually, I know Lois from a program that I'm doing at her church, and we spent 3 hours together talking first about disposition, then about ceremony, and then about services, right? And now that was a group setting. So one-on-one, you might not need that much time, right? But the thing is there are so many things to consider that are so much more than that question, cremation or burial. Cremation or burial is the first question. And then there are approximately 3,722 questions after that that you need to answer that will be asked of you by someone like me, a funeral director, at the time of death. And I've seen it over and over when people don't really know what their beloved's wishes are. They can, not by me and not by people like me, but I've seen less ethical, shall we say, providers who are like, look at this beautiful casket. Wouldn't mom look good in this or whatever? And it's just, it's kind of, I would, if I could prevent that for one person, I would be a happy bunny.
If someone's not planning on a funeral, how is the body taken care of?
Sure, great question, Kate.
Because my former husband, my daughters took care of it. It was difficult for them, but they did it. And what we did was we didn't have a funeral. I was still involved, but we'd been divorced for 40 years, so there wasn't a close tie for me. And what they did was they, I think it was the cremations only, just picked up the body from the hospital and took care of that, and then brought the ashes to them, and then we had a party later on. And they arranged it at my house. But
where was what country? Was that Canada?
yes, cremations only, I think, is out in Abbotsford or something, or somewhere further, somewhere slightly up the valley.
There are absolutely a number of funeral homes that will just sort of specialize, if you will, in what are called either direct or usually direct cremations would be the term. The body is taken care of. What I told you back in the second slide about how the body is transferred, the body is sheltered, there's body care. That's things like checking for a pacemaker and making sure that there's jewelry that needs to be removed or things like that. There is a basic level of care that is provided, and those costs are going to be calculated within however they wish. It's not federally mandated or anything like that. So at a real like bargain basement home kind of scenario, you could probably have around $1,000, and at a corporate funeral home that has a lot of shareholders to answer to, you could easily be looking at $5,500 for that very same set of services. The place that I'm at is essentially in the middle, and most of the independent funeral homes that I associate with are in the middle, around the $2,500 mark. That allows homes to operate independently, pay their people a living wage, live in big cities like Vancouver with living wages and that kind of thing. It's kind of like knowing your, do I shop at Amazon or do I shop at my local market, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. So there's a big wide range. One of the things that the funeral home that I'm associated with that I'm very proud of is that we actually take care of our own bodies rather than have them at a third party provider. That's something that is quite meaningful to some people and is not as meaningful to others. I am the kind of person that's fairly meaningful to. Right. Also, transparency. When you're shopping around, one of the things that I would really like to invite you into is looking at how and whether people are telling you the cost up front, or whether it's like, if you die between 9 and 4:30 on Monday to Friday, you'll pay this. But if you 5 p.m. you laugh, but it's actually true. There are so many hidden costs, and often advertised cost of like 1,000 or 1,400 or something like that. It will often end up much closer to the stated cost of a place like mine, which is like 2,500, right? So it's a bit, there can be a little bit of shady.
Yeah.
My quiet little group. We've got when we do this in person, we will have wine and cheese. There will be laughter. There will be people will be joking and joshing, and nobody will want to leave right at 7 o'clock.
Krista, can I say something if nobody else is actually asking a question right now?
Love that, Jane.
Can you actually hear me, first of all? Because I've had problems with my mic.
Okay, no, I can hear you're a bit fuzzy, but I can hear you.
Okay. I was away. This is for the other people as well. And the other people should know that I'm actually on the Deaf Apprentice workshop down at Brock House.
Yes,
I
I'm
think
just,
we're on our third week. Haven't done my homework yet, but there's a reason for that. This last week, I was away and I had somebody sitting in a seat on the bus beside me. We had the most wonderful conversations about death, planning for death, and all the other ramifications. She was married for 63 years. Her husband was a lot older. They didn't have any children. They had discussed everything.
good.
Everything was planned, and their what's the word? Their secretary was the bank.
Okay, good.
Our attorney was the bank. They had a relationship with memorial service.
Mhm.
Her husband died. She phoned the memorial service and they took over everything. She
Good.
didn't have to worry about anything at all.
Good.
And I was quite impressed because she is a very down-to-earth, matter-of-fact person. Her husband only died a year ago, but she's picked up and she's doing all these things. And we had such a wonderful conversation, reinforcing everything that you had said earlier. And then somebody else interrupted our conversation and said, "What are you talking about?" So we told, "Oh, I don't want to do that." She said, "Oh, I'm not gonna do that. Oh, that's terrible. I don't want to hear anything about that," which is exactly what you've been saying in the past. It was absolute polarization. One person was organized, it was peaceful, it was quiet, and the other person didn't want to know anything about anything.
You know what, Jane, I had a friend who's my age. She's actually a couple of years younger than me. She's just turned 50. And she has had a ridiculous amount of loss in her life. And just she lost a sibling, which is very unusual, right? At a fairly young age. And she has lost a father and she has lost a stepmother. And now she's lost her husband's mother. And all of those other people, even though two of them had life-limiting, life-threatening illnesses that were very predictable in their outcome, those people didn't have anything in place. The mother-in-law, who was very fit and able right until the very end, she had her funeral wishes. She had an enduring power of attorney, she had a will, she had a representation agreement, and she had her funeral wishes very clearly outlined and contracted. And my friend was just like, oh my God, I was gearing up to go into battle again. And then I walked into the funeral home where this lovely lady had made her prearrangements, and the whole thing was totally different. It was so easy. She left me such a gift. And this is something that I hear over and over and over. I'll say it actually next week is when it's very different from what I did tonight, but next week at Brock House is when we're going to be talking about disposition and ceremony. And one of the things that I'm going to say is that when we are able to make these decisions in a peaceful way and in a way that we have put thought to, what ends up happening is it brings us peace, but even more importantly is it brings peace to the people who are going to have to be executing our wishes. And even though we're not there, so many of us, especially women of a certain age, will say, "Oh, I don't want to be a bother." You are way more of a bother if you don't do this work. So just to get the work done, just work it through. One of the lovely folks who I will answer, but I'm gonna ask the question in the larger chat here. I'll answer it privately as well. But one of the people in the chat said, "Are there any death doulas in the United States?" And here's the wonderful thing: as folks like me, death educators and death doulas, we are popping up everywhere. We are lousy now. We are starting to just you can barely turn around without finding a death educator or a death doula. And if you don't know where to find a reputable one, and one that has some, because it's an unlicensed profession, then definitely reach out to the Canadian organizations, which are the Death Doula Network of British Columbia or the End of Life Doula Association of Canada, and get referrals to great death doulas down in the States. But we are starting to be everywhere because this is all really worth talking about. And as a number of us in the room are proving, you know, this gray tsunami is really, it's here to stay, and we're going to change everything, just like people. Oh, I lost somebody. Hope I didn't offend them with my gray hair. But just like where the boomers, in fact, have kind of changed everything that they've touched up until this point. Well, when they start to die, they're going to change everything as they start to die too. So why not be prepared? Jane's in a class at Brockhouse. I'm totally going to out you, Lois. Lois is in a class at St. Andrews Wesley. I do offer programs in larger group settings that sometimes for folks who might struggle with my day-to-day hourly rate, that might be a great idea to bring me into your organization instead of working with me one-on-one. And I also do group programming that is fairly affordable because you're dealing in a group instead of the one-on-one. So all of those options are available on my website, and you can always just DM me, or you can send me an email too. Okay. I noticed that I've gotten you all the way to 8:01. I had a good number of questions. I can totally take one more if there is one. And if not, I would just totally like to thank you for spending a night with me. I could talk about this all day, every day. I'm delighted. But any last questions?
It's not a question per se, but I do want to just say, like, my dad had, well, both my parents have the prepaid insurance. And when my dad died a couple of years ago, it was absolutely wonderful. And so I'm giving it a shout out because I thought, oh, Dad, why the hell would you done such a thing? Like, really not understanding it at the time, but what a blessing it actually was. And he had already said, okay, these are the hymns. He had sat down with someone like yourself and said, oh, this is what I want. And so it made it so easy. After he passed, I walked into this funeral home and they said, this is what your father has arranged. Is everything still legit? Are these names still, is everyone still alive, or has someone passed or whatever? And it just made it so easy. And then, so fine. And then just to give other information is like, yeah, I had such a kitty to work with. And it's like, oh, well, if you want, we can pay the minister out of the insurance. We can pay this out of the insurance, or you can pay it out of hand, and whatever's left will come back to you. And so if someone pays, let's just hypothetically say $10,000 and your funeral was only $7,000, $3,000 will come back to the estate, just so that people realize it's not, well, they paid 10,000, but it only cost, 7,000 or whatever it is. And it was reconciled. I had a check within a very short time afterwards.
Yeah.
And one thing, because everyone will plan at different ages. Yeah. So what I'm planning right now with, say, you for my funeral might change in 10 years or 5 years or whatever. Is my mom and dad did it at the exact same time. But after my dad passed, Mom said, no, I want to change my funeral arrangements. I don't want this, and this anymore. So I went back to the funeral home with her. They were great, sat down. We put everything into order. So what you put into paper now, you can change at a later date, people. It's not set in stone.
To this, because something I say all the time in my class at Brockhouse is these are living documents. As long as we are living, they should be reviewed. They should be reviewed frequently. And my mom, she arranged in 1995 people, and it's now 2022. That woman has won. Like, she has won. She paid like a tiny $1,300 for something that would probably cost $20,000 now. In all likelihood, we will not actually execute what she what she wanted because of the fact that she has lived so long and because of the fact that there are fewer friends and whatnot. And guess what? We're not going to be out of pocket. We will probably end up getting a small refund because we're not going to use the limousines that she has set aside. You know what I mean? So like we're probably going to, we're all like green folks, so we're going to like take our bikes to the cemetery. But you know, it is actually some of the best and safest, if you will, insurance that you can possibly have. And in Canada in particular, if I were speaking to you in the UK or Australia, and actually even certain parts of the States where we don't have this this national programming that is underwritten by an incredibly large organization that is going to keep you safe no matter where you are in PEI or in Nuvik or Victoria. Yeah, different stories in different places, but I can stand here confidently in front of you and say in Canada, you're in good shape if you take this route. So I swear to God, that wasn't paid programming with me and Carol, but Carol, you and I should hook up, man, because you're on it. Yeah, you got me. So thank you. I'm over. I've taken 5 extra minutes of your time. I am so grateful that you people showed up tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Look, oh, Bobby's showing me some paperwork. Bobby says she struggles with paperwork, but you're looking pretty good right there, my friend. So thank you. And I will send out a thank you note, a little bit of information of how to reach me, etc. Thank you to the folks who popped in the chat. You can also, I'll just put actually in the chat to everyone, just so that you have it very handy. My email address is hello@deathsapprentice.ca. And you can truly find me anytime. All right. So thank you for coming. I'm going to save the recording. And if anybody wants to share it, feel free. I know it's not glamorous. It's not some high production value kind of thing, but hopefully there was some useful info for you. And you're welcome to share it with absolutely anyone. I'll have it out to you shortly. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Krista.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Krista, I actually thought disposition, what is the word?
Disposition.
Disposition actually meant decluttering. And apparently I do need to declutter, but in actual fact, it is decluttering. It is decluttering.
And actually, I've
Slightly
done
differently.
I've done an event on decluttering, and I'm always happy to walk you through that. But decluttering is a beautiful. You know what I could do, Jane? I could send you the recording to that event that I did a couple of months ago. It was really lovely, and there's some good book recommendations and some sort of step-by-step little steps that you can take for that.
It's funny because I was actually thinking decluttering of personal effects.
Yes,
It is decluttering of personal effects.
kind of is.
Yeah.
It kind of is. It's all tied up. You got it. So I'm so glad you got here tonight. I can't tell you enough. Like, just honestly looking to my left and seeing you, I'm just like, oh, it's gonna be okay. So thank you for the energy that you bring into that program.
Now, what are you going to ask me to do next week?
I'm gonna maybe wear maybe I'll drape you in a shroud or something. How about that?
Anyway, thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it.
Bye.
Bye.
And Judy and Jane, still here or just heading out? All right. Well, I'll say goodbye. Thanks for tuning in tonight.